Hello and welcome back. Well, this is part 2 of restoring an old Woodworkers Vise. And if you haven't seen part 1, I'll leave a link in the description. So there are a few more things I need to do to this before it's finished. And the first thing I want to do is work on the mechanism that goes through here and connects to this bar. Well, not this particular bar, but a bar that will be in here. There will be a lever in the front, and then I'll be able to move the lever to disengage the half nut of the vise. So that's the part I want to work on first, and I've clamped the vise up with the 2 bits of wood in here, so I know how much space I've got to play with where that part goes through the vise. First thing I need to do is measure the bore of this hole here, and it's 12.85 millimeters, which is a weird size. I cut off a piece of 25 millimeter bar, that's just under 1 inch, and I turn down the surface until we get to that 12.85 millimeters, and then that piece there fits into the hole quite nicely. The bar will come up like this, so I need to cut away half of this round part here. To save me a whole lot of milling in the milling machine, I get out the trusty angle grinder and I cut a section out. Then I tidy that up in the milling machine and I go down to the depth that I need to go down to. The bar will be held on by a bolt, so I drill a 5 millimeter hole, and then I use a M6 tap to make a M6 thread for the bolt. I start the thread in the milling machine and then I finish it off by hand. Apart from doing the other end where the lever is, this part's pretty much finished, and I'm going to do the lever bit later. I first want to work on the bar that goes up here to make sure that it's nice and straight, so we'll do that next. This is a piece of 40mm by 3mm thick steel, and I've got to take off about 6 or 7 mils. Now the half nut has this angle on it here, so what I need to do is to cut a bit of a bevel on the piece of steel that we're going to put in here, a bit like this. I initially do that with a flat disc, but that was a bit slow and inconsistent. So I did it with the belt grinder, which gave me a nice bevel and flat edge here, and also done the back as well. It slides in here very, very nicely. This end goes up to the mechanism. Now I'm going to parallel this piece of metal up with the bar down the bottom here, and then I'll work out where I need to put this end, and I'll put a bolt hole through there. I don't have any transfer punches, but I made this pointy 6mm bolt, and I'll put a bit of bearing glue on the end, and then I was able to mark out where to drill the hole on this piece of steel. I drill a 6mm hole here for the M6 bolt that goes through it. So a bolt and washer go in there. We can tighten that up, and that works really well. The next step is to make a cap over here to hold the bar in. I found this piece of scrap. I cut a piece off here, but there's about 1mm to come out for it to fit in properly. Then drill a hole, and then cut about 3mm square out of here. This thing was not parallel, it was about 1mm off, so I got the faces parallel to each other, and I also took that 1mm off the side so that it would fit in the groove here. There was a little burr or something in here, but this is a good fit. So drill a hole in there and then cut a little piece out. This is a 1/4 inch drill because it is a 1/4 inch bolt that goes through there. I bolt that down, and then that allows me to mark out where I need to cut the bottom. I have it set up in the mill, and I'm just creeping up on this black line here where I want it. Then I zero the DRO and start cutting down about 3mm. These are some finishing passes. I have it all bolted down, and there's a little bit of wiggle room in there, which is good. and the mechanism still works, which is great. So that works all good and well. The next part I'm going to work on is the front here. I'm going to make a little collar and then a lever out from that. I'm going to use a piece of 32mm round bar. I need to cut a piece off because I needed a longer piece. And I drill a hole in there about 16mm deep so it can go on the end of the shaft poking through the vise. And then I take off around about 2 or 3mm in diameter. I've cut the part off and turned it around, and I'm just putting a chamfer on the end here. That part fits on there nicely. The lever will be screwed in the side of this part, but I want it to come out from the vise a bit, so I'm milling a flat on here, and I have this at a small angle. Then a 5mm hole is drilled through here, and that is so I can tap out for a M6 thread, and the handle that I put in here will have that M6 thread on it. This is the handle, and it's a bit of 10mm round bar, and this cutter is absolutely hopeless, so I need to take that off and change the tip. I turn that down to 6mm off camera, and now we're about to thread the end here. I'm using a little die holder tool here that I made, and it works off the tailstock center to keep everything right in the middle. The thread is cleaned off, and then I test the part on there, and that works well. The next step is to cut away a little bit of the center here, just to give it some character, I guess. Then I round over the end on the belt grinder by putting the part in a hand drill, and this worked out pretty good. Now I need to mark out the flat spot for where this is going to go, so I set everything up. This screw I've put in here has a point on it, and I give it a bit of a knock with the hammer when I have everything in position, and then that will mark out where I need to put a flat on here. Now unfortunately it's a funny shape, I won't be able to hold it in a collet, so I have to go back to hand filing to make the flat. So I've done the flat, it's all finished, and this fits in very nicely, just clicks in there like that and slides up through the front jaw. I'll put the bracket on the back there. Then the handle is screwed into the collar, and that is lined up with the flat, and that works pretty good. Now I do need to tighten this down pretty firmly, so what I might do off camera is mill a couple of flats on here so I can put a small spanner on there and tighten it down. The next step is to remove this pin so I can get this part off and tidy it all up in the lathe, and also need to remove the handle here and tidy that up as well. I use some vice grips on the pin here, and I'm able to rotate it around a little bit left and right, but it's stuck in there and I can't get it out, and I run into a bigger problem which I'll show you later. So I move on to trying to remove these ends on the bar. I don't know if these are screwed on or if they're pressed on, but they're on there really tight. I try and use a little bit of heat to try and get them off, but as you can see here, I put these big grippers on here and the whole bar is twisting in the vise. After some time mucking around with it, I actually got the part quite loose here, but even with the hammer I still couldn't knock the end of it off there. So I tightened the bar in the vise really tight, and I went and got another tool to knock that end bit off. There you go, I knocked the end bit off. As I mentioned, this pin I think was just twisting inside itself and it eventually broke off, so that is no good and I have to deal with that. I decided to drill it out, so I need to use the center punch to put a center in there. And then I'm set up in the mill here with a 3mm drill bit, and you can't see it from this camera angle, but from the front of the milling machine, this drill bit bends like a banana. So I stopped that process pretty quick because I don't want to have a broken drill bit in there as well. I then changed the drill bit for a 6mm 4-flute end mill, and I mill down to that lead screw shaft, and then I'm able to persuade this part off the lead screw. That broken pin is removed from the lead screw. This hole for the pin is not in the center of the lead screw, it's off to one side. So I put everything back together and I drill a hole through here, 6.5mm with a drill bit, and then I come back and use a reamer to take it out to 7mm. And got to be a bit careful here, you need to flush off that reamer when it gets full of shavings. I have a 7mm hardened pin and that will go in through there. I put that in off camera and I cut the ends off flush. Now set up in the lathe and I turn the outside of this part. That is cleaned up pretty nicely there. Then I clean up the end by redoing the chamfer on the end here. Lastly, I clean the groove out with a form tool, and there's quite a bit of vibration here, so I use a bit of cutting oil. A bit of deburring on the holes here. And that part is pretty much done. Fits in there nicely. Now I need to deal with this part here, and this is quite sloppy in here, so I think I'm going to make a brand new bar. But first of all I need to clean this hole out a little bit. It's a little bit elongated because of the way the vise tightens up, so I try and make it more round with this homemade honing tool. I make the bar out of a piece of 20mm hot rolled steel bar. That's turned down in the lathe to 17mm. The hole in the other piece is about 17.15mm. This piece fits on here quite nicely. Here is an indication of how sloppy and wobbly the original part was compared to the new part that I made. So it slides in there and there's hardly any wobble at all. I now need to make some ends for this bar. I'm using some scrap pieces here. I turn them down to the right diameter, and then a hole is drilled and turned out to the right diameter for the bar. I part that off in the lathe, and then I tap that end onto the bar, and it's a very tight fit. Some final cleaning up, a little chamfer for some aesthetics, and that is one end of the bar complete. The bar will fit through the center there like that. I'll put the second cap on once I have these parts all blued and finished. Next I want to address the top of the vise here. It's had a lot of bangs and knocks on the top here, so I want to get that nice and smooth. And I don't think I'm going to be able to do this in the mill, so I'm probably going to have to make a jig up for the belt grinder. This is my homemade adjustable table for the belt grinder. Goes in the front here like this, and it's just too wide for the vise here, so I've had to fabricate this one here to use for this job. It's a matter of just sliding it across the rest and slowly taking away the top of the vise there. But the front jaw does have some ribs on it, so I've got to try and keep this square to the grinding belt. I also do the two sides off camera. There's the top all done. That came out pretty good. This is one of the sides. There's a little nick in here. I didn't want to take too much off of that. And this is the other side. Again, a little bit missing on the corner, but I didn't want to grind that down too far. The edges are quite rough, so I use a flat disc here just to put a 45-degree bevel on there, and they came up pretty good, I think. I use a file to put a 45 on the corners as well. There they are, the jaws are all done, and I think they look pretty good, particularly with those bevels. That's pretty much it for the vise, so it's just a matter of cleaning everything up here in acetone. And then I need to mask off these bars because I don't want to get paint on those. Use a bit of masking tape and newspaper. Then I use some Rust-Oleum paint to paint the fixed jaw. And also the moving jaw. For all of the metal parts that I made up, I'm going to glue them. So I'm washing them out in some acetone to make sure that I get all the grease and grime off of them. I use this Puma blue for the bluing, and it works really fast, and it does quite a good job as well. So all the parts are just swished around in the liquid there, and they change colour to black. Once they're all black, they're put into some water to neutralise the reaction. And then I dry off all of the parts with the air gun. Once complete, all of the parts have a generous dose of oil put on them, and that helps protect the bluing. I still have to wait for the paint to harden up on the other parts, so these will be left in oil for a day or so. While I'm waiting for those other parts, I've got the 2 pieces of wood for the jaws, and I'm using the drum sander that I built to clean up these pieces of wood. So there they are there. I've cleaned up all 4 sides, so they're ready to be screwed back on to the jaws. The best part of these projects that I like is the assembly at the end. I'm putting a little bit of grease on these parallel bars, then I can fit the fixed jaw onto the moving jaw. Next, the bracket goes on to the back, and that is locked down with those grub screws. I use my very large homemade vise to press the other end cap onto the bar. Then I put a bit of grease on the bar, and the lead screw is put through in place. There's a couple of washers that go on, and if you haven't noticed, I've forgotten to put the half nut in. So I'll pull the lead screw back out a little bit, and then put the half nut in, and those washers are put back in place, and then that's all locked down in the back there with a roll pin. And that looks pretty good. The next step is to fit the part that puts the tension on the half nut. So that's bolted in place. There's a spring that goes in the center there, and then the cap gets screwed on and locked down. I put the inside half of the mechanism through the front jaw, and the bar is screwed onto that mechanism. This is the cap that holds the bar in place. The front collar and lever are fitted. That's nipped up, and that works great. The last part is to fit the wooden blocks on the front jaw and the back jaw. The vise is then bolted to the bench with some assistance. There's a couple of bolts in the front here, and I put the remaining 2 bolts in off camera. The vise functions well. I can undo it with the handle, and then if I want to pull it further out faster, just use the lever. Then wind it back in onto the item that you want to hold in the vise. I can push it all the way back in, lock it into position, and leave it closed there while not in use. There's a still shot of the front of the vise, and another shot of the side with the vise open. Well, this was a pretty good project. I really enjoyed restoring this vise. It's going to be very useful in the wood turning shed. So once again, thanks to the person who gave me the vise. I do really appreciate it. And I've got it all up and running, and it will get some good use. That's pretty much it for this video. I hope everyone has a great day, and once again, thanks for watching.